All right, so get ready because we are diving deep into northern Mexico today.
Oh, yeah.
And, you gave us such a fascinating mix of sources to work with, academic excerpts, historical accounts.
Right.
You've even got some legal documents in there.
Yeah,
It seems like you really want to get a complete view of this region
absolutely.
from all these different perspectives, right?
A multifaceted understanding is definitely the goal.
Yeah, and one thing that really jumped out at me was this whole concept of a syndemic.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Did you see that in there too?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's like this perfect storm of problems that just seems to hit the most vulnerable people the hardest.
Yeah, it's not just one issue. It's like all these different factors that are all sort of intertwined, and they
Yeah.
kind of come together and create this really, really tough situation.
Exactly. And it makes you realize
Yeah.
that it's not just about like bad luck or like personal choices.
No, not
It's
at
like
all.
these systems that are stacked against entire populations.
Yeah, systems that create and perpetuate these inequalities.
Exactly. It's a really powerful concept.
And it's something that we see playing out right now. I mean, look at
Oh, yeah.
COVID-19.
Okay.
The virus itself was obviously a serious threat,
Right.
but its impact was just magnified, exponentially
Yeah.
in communities that were already struggling with
Right.
poverty, lack of healthcare access,
Yeah.
and all sorts of environmental problems.
Yeah. So it's like the virus just kind of came in
Exactly.
and took advantage of these weaknesses that were already there.
Absolutely. It exposed those vulnerabilities that were already deeply embedded in the system.
Yeah, and it really highlights how these different issues are all interconnected, right?
Right. It's all connected.
It's not just like isolated problems.
It's the web,
It's all part of a bigger system.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to take that systemic view when we're trying to understand and address these problems.
Okay, so before we get too deep into that system,
Sure.
let's maybe back up a little bit.
Okay.
Because even just defining northern Mexico itself
Oh, yeah.
feels like a challenge.
That's a tough one.
Right, where do you even draw the lines?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not just lines on a map, is it?
Right, it's more than just geography.
It's a region with incredible diversity,
Right,
a rich history,
yeah.
and those traditional labels that people try to use.
Oh, yeah.
Like Arid America,
Right.
or the Great Chichimeca.
Yeah.
They just don't really capture the essence of it, you know?
Yeah, they're too simplistic.
They oversimplify a very complex reality.
Yeah, it's like trying to summarize like a whole epic novel
Right.
in one sentence.
Exactly.
How do you capture all of that?
Yeah, how do you capture the spirit of a place that's been shaped by so many different forces?
Right, like you've got the indigenous cultures,
Right.
the Spanish colonialism,
Uh-huh.
the relationship with the U.S. It's all kind of intertwined.
Okay. And it's constantly evolving.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, northern Mexico is a place that's always been in flux.
It's dynamic.
It's a place of constant change and adaptation.
And conflict too.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, we can't forget about that.
No, conflict and struggle are woven into the fabric of northern Mexico.
Yeah, it's like this history of inequality
Yeah.
that just keeps repeating itself in different forms.
And those historical roots of inequality are really key
Oh, yeah.
to understanding the structural violence we see today.
Can you give me an example?
Sure, like during the Porfiriato era, from 1876 to 1911,
Right.
they had these developmentalist policies, things like
Yeah,
railroad construction.
right, to try to modernize the country.
Exactly.
But it didn't really work out for everyone, did it?
Well, on the surface, it looked like progress.
Right.
But it actually led to these massive land grabs
Oh, wow.
and a huge concentration of wealth.
And who was getting that wealth?
Well, a lot of it ended up in the hands of foreign investors, like
Oh.
William Randolph Hearst.
Who's that?
Oh, he was this American media giant, like
Okay.
newspapers and magazines.
Right.
And he ended up owning these massive estates in Chihuahua,
Oh, why?
while a lot of the local people were struggling to meet their basic needs.
It's crazy how one person
I know.
can end up controlling so much
It's
land,
mind-boggling.
especially in a region where so many people are struggling.
Yeah, and that kind of inequality was a major factor
Yeah.
in the Mexican Revolution,
Right, because people were fed up.
Exactly. They were fed up with the concentration of power and wealth in the hands of a few.
So the revolution was trying to redistribute that wealth.
Well, that was one of the goals.
Right.
They wanted to give land back to the people.
Okay.
But even the revolution, with its aim of land redistribution,
Right.
it couldn't fully untangle those deep-rooted inequalities.
Oh, so even after all that upheaval,
Yeah.
things didn't really change that much.
Well, some things did change, but
Yeah.
those fundamental inequalities, they persisted, in different forms.
Right, like the echoes of the past.
Exactly. The echoes were still there.
Still shaping the present.
And then you had new forces coming in,
Like
globalization,
Okay.
neoliberalism.
Right, adding another layer of complexity.
Exactly. It's like layer upon layer of history and change.
And how did neoliberalism affect northern Mexico?
Well, it had a huge impact,
Yeah.
with its emphasis on deregulation and privatization.
Right, the free market.
It led to booms in certain sectors,
Like what?
tourism, extractive industries,
Right.
logging, things like that.
Right, so there was economic growth.
Yeah, but it wasn't evenly distributed.
Oh, okay.
And it often came at a high cost.
Like what kind of cost?
Well, further dispossession of indigenous lands,
Right.
environmental damage,
Oh, yeah.
and increased poverty for many people.
It's like that saying, right?
What's that?
Progress for some,
Right.
exploitation for others.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's often the case.
And the U.S. and Mexico border, that kind of adds another layer to all of this, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a place where all these forces,
Yeah.
globalization, economic inequality, migration,
Right.
they all kind of come together.
And collide.
And the people who are most vulnerable often end up paying the price.
So we've got this history of power imbalances,
Uh-huh.
this economic exploitation,
Yeah.
and globalization kind of mixing it all up.
It's a recipe for structural violence.
Yeah. But what does that actually look like?
Well, let's get into some specifics.
Okay, I'm ready.
So one of the most heartbreaking examples is the level of gender violence in northern Mexico,
Oh, yeah.
especially in places like Ciudad Juarez.
Oh, I've heard about that.
The book uses this really chilling term,
What's that?
systemic sexual femicide.
Oh, wow.
And that really gets at how deeply ingrained this problem is.
So it's not just like random acts of violence.
No, it's a systemic issue.
It's like woven into the fabric of society.
Exactly. And women are doubly dispossessed,
How so?
They're not only victims of violence, but they're also denied justice.
Oh, wow.
The system itself fails to protect them.
And that vulnerability extends to migrants too, right?
Absolutely. The stories about what they face crossing the border,
It's terrifying.
it's truly horrifying. The extortion, the assault, even death.
And it's like a strange contradiction, isn't it?
What do you mean?
That Mexico celebrates its own migrants
Yeah,
who go north for work
right.
as heroes,
Yeah.
but then criminalizes Central American migrants.
Who are just passing through on their way to the U.S.
It's like their worth is determined by where they're going.
Yeah, it's a matter of perspective, isn't it?
And who benefits from their labor.
It's all about who benefits from the system and who gets exploited by it.
Right, and that brings us back to structural violence.
It all comes back to that.
It's like this invisible force
Uh-huh.
that shapes people's lives.
And determines their destiny.
Yeah, it's a powerful concept.
And it's something we need to be aware of.
So we can start to dismantle it.
Exactly. Awareness is the first step.
And what are some other examples of how this structural violence manifests in northern Mexico?
Well, the health and environmental consequences are pretty stark.
Okay, like what?
Well, the book talks about this issue of mesothelioma in Chihuahua.
I think I've heard of that. Isn't that a type of cancer?
Yeah, it's a really aggressive form of cancer.
And what causes it?
Exposure to asbestos.
Oh, right, asbestos. I thought that was banned a long time ago.
In many places it is, but in northern Mexico, they've had this problem with unregulated asbestos mining.
So people are still being exposed to it.
Yeah, and it's led to these high rates of mesothelioma among workers and people living in those communities.
It's like their health is being sacrificed.
Yeah, for the sake of profit.
It's a clear example of how structural violence isn't always visible.
Right.
It's hidden within these systems.
It's woven into the very fabric of the economy.
And it's costing people their lives.
Literally.
It's devastating.
And it's not just about physical health. It's about the health of entire communities.
Right.
Well, child malnutrition in indigenous communities is a huge problem in Chihuahua.
Really?
They actually have the highest rates of infant and maternal death in all of Mexico.
Wow. I didn't know
That's
that.
a stark reality.
And what's causing that?
Well, it's a complex issue,
Right.
but it's definitely linked to structural violence.
How so?
Well, things like land dispossession, lack of access to health care, and cultural insensitivity all play a role.
So it's like these communities are being marginalized.
Yes, and their basic needs are not being met.
Now, I remember reading about this program, the Chihuahua Crease Contigo program.
Oh, yeah.
Which was trying to address this problem.
Right. It seemed like a really promising initiative.
Yeah, but it sounds like it ran into some roadblocks.
Yeah, they were trying to take a culturally sensitive approach
Right.
to addressing malnutrition.
Which is important.
Absolutely. You can't just impose outside solutions. You need to work with communities.
Yeah.
And respect their cultural values.
But it didn't really work out.
Well, it had some success,
Okay.
but it was ultimately hampered by bureaucratic hurdles.
Oh, wow.
And a lack of political will.
So it's like, even when there are good intentions,
right,
the system itself can get in the way.
The system can be its own worst enemy.
Yeah, it's a frustrating reality.
It's a constant struggle.
Okay, so we've gone from these historical inequalities to modern-day globalization.
Yeah.
From gender violence to environmental degradation.
It's a lot to take in.
It's clear that structural violence is this complex issue with these deep roots and these far-reaching consequences.
And it's important to remember that the responsibility for perpetuating this violence is diffuse, you know?
What do you mean?
It's not just about identifying, like, the bad guys.
Oh.
It's about understanding this web of complicity that allows these injustices to continue.
So who are the actors in this web?
Well, the state itself plays a role, you know, with its policies and actions.
Right, the government.
Then you have the media shaping public perception.
Oh, yeah.
And social networks, cultural norms, all contributing to the problem.
It's like we're all tangled up in this web, even if we don't realize it.
It's a web of interconnected systems.
But if you're all part of it, does that mean we can untangle it?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Is there hope for breaking this cycle of structural violence?
Well, that's something we'll explore further as we continue our deep dive.
Okay. I'm ready for some hope.
Let's see what we can find.
Okay, so welcome back to our deep dive into structural violence in northern Mexico.
Yeah.
You know, that last part was a lot.
It was heavy stuff.
It's kind of easy to feel overwhelmed
It is.
by all these issues.
Absolutely.
But you know,
yeah,
the sources that you gave me,
right,
they also talk about like glimpses of hope.
Oh, yeah.
Of people who are pushing back against these systems.
Yeah, people who are working to create change.
Exactly, to like build a better future.
There are definitely those bright spots.
Yeah, and I think we need that right now.
We do.
Because it's easy to get bogged down in all the negativity.
It's easy to lose hope.
Yeah.
But, you know, those sources, they highlight these incredible individuals and organizations that are working tirelessly to challenge structural violence.
And they're trying to build what the book calls integral peace.
Exactly. And that's such a powerful concept, you know?
Yeah, tell me more about that.
It's not just about the absence of war.
Right.
It's about creating a society where everyone can thrive.
Right, where everyone has a chance.
Yeah, a chance to live a life of dignity and purpose.
Okay, so can you give us some specific examples of what this integral peace looks like in action?
Absolutely. So let's start with gender violence.
Okay.
You know, we talked about that earlier.
Right, especially in Ciudad Juarez.
Yeah, where the femicide rates are just tragically high.
It's heartbreaking.
It is, but there are these amazing organizations working there, like Casa Amiga.
Oh, yeah, Casa Amiga.
They're doing incredible work.
I remember reading about them. Don't they offer all sorts of services for women who are experiencing violence?
Exactly. They provide legal aid,
okay,
psychological counseling,
right,
and even shelter.
Wow, so they're really providing this holistic support.
Yeah, they're trying to meet the needs of women on multiple levels.
But they also go beyond that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I remember reading that they do like workshops and training programs.
Right, to educate the community about gender equality and healthy relationships.
So they're not just helping women escape violence.
No.
They're trying to prevent it from happening in the first place.
They're trying to get to the root of the problem.
It's like they're planting seeds of change.
I like that, planting seeds of change.
Yeah, but that's a long process, right?
Oh, it's a long and difficult process.
Especially considering, you know,
yeah,
how deeply ingrained machismo attitudes are.
Yeah, in some parts of Mexican society, it's really entrenched.
But Casa Amiga is challenging that.
They are.
They're challenging that culture of impunity.
Right, that often surrounds gender-based violence.
It's like they're saying no more.
Exactly, this is not acceptable.
And by supporting victims.
Yeah.
And holding perpetrators accountable.
They're sending a really powerful message.
Yeah, that this violence won't be tolerated.
It's about changing the norms.
It really shows that even in the face of these really deep-rooted problems,
right,
change is possible.
It is. And it often starts with these courageous individuals and organizations.
Yeah, who are working at the grassroots level.
They're the ones on the front lines.
And we see that same spirit of courage.
Oh, absolutely.
In the work that's being done to support migrants.
Yeah. You know, we talked about those harrowing journeys.
Right. The dangers that they face.
The dangers from organized crime.
Yeah.
And sometimes even from state authorities.
It's a really complex and dangerous situation.
It is, and it's often overlooked.
But are there organizations that are working to, like, make migration safer?
Oh, yeah, there are.
And to protect the rights of migrants?
Absolutely. And one group that really stands out is the Kino Border Initiative.
Oh, I think I've heard of them.
They're a binational organization run by Jesuit priests and lay people.
Okay.
And they operate a shelter and soup kitchen in Nogales, Mexico, which is right on the border.
Right, and that provides, like, basic necessities.
Exactly. Things like food, clothing, medical care.
Wow, so it's a real lifeline for people.
Oh, absolutely. For so many migrants who've been deported or are in transit.
The safe haven.
But their work goes far beyond that.
Okay, how so?
Well, they also offer legal orientation to help migrants understand their rights, and they advocate for policy changes.
Well, they're trying to change the system itself.
They're working on multiple levels.
To make it more humane and just...
Exactly. They're not just putting a Band-Aid on the problem.
You're trying to address the root causes.
They're trying to create lasting change.
And it sounds like they're really committed to that.
Oh, yeah. They're in it for the long haul.
It's really inspiring to see that level of dedication.
It is. And they even accompany migrants.
Really?
Who are being deported back to their home countries to ensure their safety.
Oh, that's amazing.
And to document any abuses that might occur.
So they're putting themselves on the line.
They are.
To protect these vulnerable people.
They're bearing witness.
Yeah, it really embodies that concept of accompaniment that the book talks about.
Being present with those who are suffering.
Right.
And offering support in tangible ways.
It's not just about words.
No, it's about action.
It's about concrete actions of solidarity.
And compassion.
And we see that same principle at work.
Oh, yeah.
In the efforts to protect the environment.
Right.
In northern Mexico.
Because environmental degradation is often linked to structural violence.
Especially for indigenous communities.
Absolutely. They're often the ones who bear the brunt of it.
Who are fighting to protect their ancestral lands.
Like the Yaqui people in Sonora.
Oh, right, the Yaqui people.
They've been fighting for decades.
Really?
To stop the construction of a gas pipeline.
Oh, wow. And why are they opposed to the pipeline?
Well, it would run right through their territory, and they're concerned about the environmental impact.
Right.
And the potential for damage to their sacred sites.
So it's a really important issue for them.
It's about their survival, you know.
Yeah, it's about protecting their land.
And their way of life.
And it's like a classic example of environmental racism.
Yeah, where communities of color
are the ones who are disproportionately affected
by environmental damage
and exploitation.
And the Yaqui people have faced so many challenges in their fight.
Like what?
Well, they've faced violence.
Oh, wow.
Intimidation, even assassination attempts.
It's unbelievable.
It shows the high stakes involved.
Yeah, and the courage that it takes.
Right, to stand up for what's right.
To stand up to these powerful forces.
They're risking their lives.
It's a sobering reminder that the fight for justice often comes at a high cost. But it also speaks to their resilience.
Yeah, their determination.
Their unwavering commitment.
To protecting their land and their culture.
It's really inspiring.
And it highlights how integral peace must include environmental justice.
Right, it's all connected.
It's all interconnected.
So we're seeing these connections between different forms of activism and resistance.
It's a tapestry.
From supporting women facing violence to protecting migrant rights to safeguarding the environment.
It's all part of the same struggle.
It seems like these movements are all interconnected.
They are, because they're all addressing different facets of structural violence.
Right, and they're all fighting for a more just and equitable world.
It's a multifaceted movement.
And that includes addressing the health disparities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And child malnutrition in indigenous communities.
We talked about the Chihuahua Crease Contigo program.
Yeah, and it had some successes, but
it wasn't enough.
Right.
So are there other initiatives
that
are building on those lessons learned?
I'm really curious about that.
There are, like the Center for Rural Development.
Okay.
Or CEDAR for short.
Okay.
So they've been working in the Sierra Tarahumara.
Oh, wow.
For over 40 years.
That is a long time.
They're really committed to this work.
And what do they do?
Well, they focus on strengthening community food systems.
Okay.
By promoting traditional agriculture.
Right, getting back to the roots.
And they provide training in nutrition and health.
So they're not just giving people food.
No.
They're teaching them how to grow their own food.
Exactly. It's about empowering communities.
To become self-sufficient.
and to reclaim their traditional knowledge.
It's so important to respect that knowledge.
It is, and to recognize the wisdom of indigenous communities.
It's a really holistic approach.
It is, and it's about working with communities.
Right, not imposing outside solutions.
Collaboration is key.
And respecting their cultural diversity.
It's about honoring their traditions and their values.
It's a perfect example of how integral peace is about empowering communities.
And respecting their cultural diversity.
And it's about fostering self-reliance.
And resilience.
Okay, so we've got all these different groups working on all these different fronts.
Right.
All connected by this vision of integral peace.
It's a beautiful vision.
It is, but I still keep coming back to this question.
What's that?
How do we overcome these systems of oppression that are so deeply entrenched?
It's a daunting task.
It feels like a David and Goliath battle.
It does, but remember, change often starts with a shift in consciousness.
Okay, I'm listening. How do we create that shift?
Well, it starts with education.
Okay.
Understanding the history and the root causes of structural violence.
So we need to learn about these issues.
Yes, we need to be informed.
And that's what we're doing right now, right?
Exactly. Engaging with these complex issues.
Having these conversations.
It's so important.
But it's not enough to just have the knowledge.
No, it's about what we do with that knowledge.
Right. It needs to change the way we see the world.
It needs to transform our hearts and minds.
And guide our actions.
Exactly. Knowledge without action is meaningless.
And it's about listening to the voices of the people who are most affected by these systems.
We need to amplify their stories.
Yeah, and let their experiences inform our understanding.
They're the experts on their own lives.
And it's an ongoing process, right?
Absolutely. We're always learning and unlearning.
Yeah, it's a journey.
It's about being open to new perspectives.
Okay, so we need to educate ourselves.
Yeah.
And be willing to challenge our own biases.
And assumptions.
What else can we do to foster this integral peace?
Well, we need to cultivate those values we talked about earlier.
Like empathy and compassion.
Exactly, and solidarity.
Right.
And a deep respect for human dignity.
Those are essential values.
They are. They're the foundation of a just and peaceful society.
But how do we cultivate them in a world that feels so driven by greed?
Yeah. That's the challenge, isn't it?
It feels like we're swimming upstream.
It does, but it's not impossible.
Okay, so how do we do it?
We need to create spaces where these values can flourish.
Okay, like what?
Like community organizations.
Right.
That bring people together from different backgrounds.
Okay, so fostering those connections.
Creating opportunities for dialogue and understanding.
And what about art and culture?
Oh, absolutely. They can be incredibly powerful tools for promoting empathy and challenging perspectives.
And what about education?
Education is crucial. You know, schools that teach children to value cooperation and respect for others.
Right, starting them young.
Planting those seeds early on.
So it's about creating a culture
Yeah.
that nourishes those values.
Where peace and justice are not just abstract ideals.
But lived realities.
Exactly. It's about changing the fabric of society.
And economic justice plays a role in that too, right?
Oh, absolutely. You can't separate economic justice from social justice.
Right. It's all connected.
It's all interwoven.
So how do we promote economic justice?
Well, we need to challenge those neoliberal policies.
Right, that prioritize profit over people.
And the planet.
We need to advocate for policies that promote fair wages.
And access to healthcare and education.
And sustainable development.
That benefits everyone.
Not just a select few.
It's about creating an economic system that works for everyone.
And recognizing that true prosperity can't be measured just by GDP.
It's about well-being.
Right. It's about quality of life.
It's about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Not just survive.
Exactly. To reach their full potential.
And to live a life of dignity and purpose.
That's the ultimate goal.
And as we strive for this integral peace, we also have to think about the future.
Absolutely. We have a responsibility to future generations.
And to the planet.
We need to be good stewards.
Right. So it's about shifting our mindset.
From extraction to sustainability.
From exploitation to caretaking.
It's a profound shift in perspective.
From a narrow focus on individual gain.
To a broader vision of collective well-being.
It's beautiful, but it also feels daunting.
It is a monumental task.
But it's not about achieving some kind of utopia.
No.
It's about continuously striving.
One step at a time.
To create a more just and equitable world.
It's an ongoing process.
Even small actions can make a difference.
Especially when we work together.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From understanding the root causes of structural violence
Yeah.
to exploring these practical solutions
Right.
and seeing all these inspiring examples of people making a difference.
There's so much happening on the ground.
And it's important to remember that this deep dive,
Yeah.
it's not just about analyzing problems.
It's about empowering you, the listener,
Right, to take action.
to become an agent of change.
We've laid out the challenges and the possibilities.
But ultimately, it's up to each of us
To decide how we want to engage with this information.
to decide what role we want to play.
What will you do with this knowledge?
How will you make a difference?
It's a powerful question to ponder.
It is.
And I think it's a good place to shift gears
Okay.
and move on to the final part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to our deep dive on structural violence in northern Mexico. You know, we've really covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
You know, we've gone from these historical roots of inequality
Right.
to the complexities of globalization,
Uh-huh.
from the devastating impact that it's having on these vulnerable communities,
Yeah.
to those glimmers of hope that we see
Right.
in people who are really fighting for change.
Absolutely.
So, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what are the key takeaways
That's a great question.
that you really hope listeners walk away with?
Well, I think the most important one is that integral peace
Yeah.
is not just some utopian dream.
Yeah.
You know, it's a possibility
Yeah.
that's within our reach.
Okay.
But it does require,
Also,
it requires us to kind of embrace complexity. Okay.
you know, to challenge our assumptions
Yeah.
and to act with courage and compassion
Right.
and a deep commitment to justice.
Yeah. So it's not about waiting for someone else to
Okay.
fix the problem.
It's about taking responsibility
Right.
for creating a more just and equitable world.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.
Absolutely.
Our choices have consequences,
Yeah.
and that even small actions can make a difference.
Especially when we work together.
You can't just sit back and hope for the best.
We have to be proactive.
We need to be active participants.
Exactly. We need to roll up our sleeves and get involved.
Okay, I love that, active participants, but where do we even begin?
That's the question, isn't it?
What are some tangible steps we can take?
Well, you know, as we've discussed,
Yeah.
education is so important.
Okay.
We need to educate ourselves
Right.
and others about the root causes of structural violence.
So learn about these issues.
Yeah, and how colonialism and globalization,
And systems of power and privilege have shaped the world.
right, it's about understanding the history
Understanding the context.
and letting that knowledge transform us.
Yeah, it's not just about accumulating facts.
Right, it's about letting it sink in
It's about internalizing it and letting it guide our actions.
and be willing to listen to the voices
Yes.
of those who are most affected by these systems,
Centering your experiences.
amplifying their stories.
They have so much to teach us.
And it's an ongoing process,
It is the lifelong journey
always learning, always unlearning.
and always evolving.
So education is key, and challenging our own biases.
Yeah, being willing to question our assumptions.
What else can we do to foster integral peace?
Well, you know, we've got to cultivate those values
Yeah.
that we talked about earlier, you know, empathy, compassion, solidarity.
Right, and that respect for human dignity.
Exactly. Those are the building blocks
Yeah.
of a just and peaceful society.
But how do we do that in a world
I know.
that feels so driven by greed?
Yeah, it can be discouraging.
It feels like we're swimming against the tide.
It does, but it's not impossible.
Okay, how do we do it?
We need to create those spaces
Okay.
where these values can flourish.
Yeah?
Spaces where people can connect across lines of difference.
Yeah, like what kinds of spaces?
Well, you know, think about community organizations
Oh,
that
yeah.
bring people together from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Fostering understanding and connection.
What about art and culture?
Oh, they can be incredibly powerful
Right.
for celebrating diversity and promoting empathy.
And education, too.
Absolutely. Schools that teach children to value cooperation and respect for others,
Right.
they're laying the groundwork for a more peaceful future.
So it's about creating a culture
Yeah.
where peace and justice aren't just these abstract ideals.
They're lived realities.
They're woven into the fabric of our society.
We need to create that tapestry.
And we need to pay attention to the economic threads as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Economic justice is so intertwined with social justice.
So what can we do to promote economic justice?
Well, we have to challenge those neoliberal policies that prioritize profit over people and the planet.
Yeah, we got to speak out against that.
We need to advocate for fair wages, access to healthcare and education, and sustainable development.
Right, so it benefits everyone,
It's about creating an economic system that works for all members of society.
not just those at the top.
And recognizing that true prosperity can't be measured just by GDP.
Right. It's about well-being.
It's about quality of life.
It's about creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Exactly. Not just survive, but thrive.
To reach their full potential.
And to live a life of dignity and purpose.
And as we strive for this integral piece, we need to think about the future as well.
Absolutely. We have a responsibility to future generations.
And to the planet.
We need to be good stewards of the earth.
And we need to shift our mindset from extraction and exploitation
to stewardship and sustainability.
It's a profound shift.
It is. It's about moving from a narrow focus on individual gain to a broader vision of collective well-being.
A vision that encompasses not just our own needs,
but the needs of all beings, present and future.
It's inspiring, but it's also challenging.
It's both. It requires courage and commitment and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
But the fight for justice and peace is always worth it.
It is. It's the most important fight there is.
Well, I think this has been a really incredible conversation.
It has.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into structural violence in northern Mexico.
It's been a pleasure.
You know, we've explored some really complex and challenging issues.
We have.
But I hope we've also inspired you to think critically, to act boldly.
And to never give up hope.
The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
So what will your step be?
Thanks for listening.